Okay, welcome to the Temple of the Silver Stars public webinar. So my name is Matthew. I'm an academic track instructor for the Temple of the Silver Star, and this will be the fourth class in our 12-part series on the paths, letters, and correspondences. So, we've been talking about the Hebrew alphabet a lot and about its correspondences, symbolism. So in our first class, we had kind of an introduction. I talked about the idea of correspondences and did kind of an overview of what that's meant, different points in the Western esoteric tradition, and then a little bit about how the Hebrew alphabet became kind of our central anchor point for all our different sets of elemental, astrological correspondences, and some about its symbolism. And so in these today, we'll finish off a kind of subset of three classes talking about the Sefer Yetzirah and the three main divisions of the letters into the three mother letters, attributed to the elements, the 7 double letters attributed to the planets, and then today we'll be talking about the 12 single letters attributed to the signs of the zodiac. So there you got the Hebrew alphabet on your screen there. Hopefully most people we won't actually be talking about the letters an enormous amount. We'll be spend more time talking about the zodiac and about the signs of the zodiac than we will about the letters themselves this week. But there are 12 of them rather than 3 or 7, so there's just a little bit more to recognize. I just wanted to make a couple of preliminary remarks before we jump in. The first one, I don't know that I actually covered this in the first class. I know I mentioned it a couple of times in the last few classes about how when we're looking at the Sefer Yetzirah, we've been working with like Aryeh Kaplan's translation, and he's using the what's called the Gra version or the Ari Gra version of the Sefer Yetzirah. But that as I kind of talked about it, for the Hermetic tradition, the Hermetic, Kabbalic tradition, especially from the Golden Dawn, passing through Crowley, that the attributions we were using were closer to the short version attributions, though the Yetziratic attributions, like to the planets, don't match any known version of the Sefer Yetzirah. So I just want to say a word about the short version there. I think I talked about the idea that it's likely to be the oldest version, and that the other ones are kind of later modifications and additions. A lot of them were probably commentaries, on the Sefer Yetzirah that eventually became part of the text itself, which is a really common thing in a lot of sort of medieval, into Renaissance manuscript traditions of like marginal notes and commentaries and things like that eventually being put into the text and treated as part of it. So that seems to have happened with the Sefer Yetzirah. But for the short version, in the way that kind of makes its way into the Golden Dawn tradition, we talked about how the correspondences themselves come through the cipher manuscript. But the short version was translated by William Wynne Westcott, who was one of the founders of the Golden Dawn. He did a translation of the Sefer Yetzirah, and he used the short version. And so that text was used in the construction of the Golden Dawn's curriculum and its rituals. And so that's why it ends up being the short version attributions that are used for things like constructing the cube of space and all that. That comes from the short version. And at least kind of in historically speaking, I mean, we might want to give other arguments about it being the oldest, and things like that. But it's through Westcott's translation that the Sefer Yetzirah first enters, the Golden Dawn tradition. So I just wanted to make a note about that. Another thing, I was looking at Westcott's translation over this past week, and some of Westcott's notes, and it was interesting that he mentions the idea of he's talking about his the set of correspondences like that the Golden Dawn uses coming through the cipher manuscript being the kind of true ones, and he says that the true attributions were never previously published, but that he talks about how they've confirmed that these are the true attributions through clairvoyance. And clairvoyance was a big topic, in the 19th century. We might think of this more like scrying, probably in our terms. But it was, a big topic in the 19th century. But it's interesting that it points to something like an empirical argument. I mean, it's not empirical in the sense of coming through the senses, the ordinary senses, but that they actually it tested these attributions. These weren't just things that they were saying, it's true because, this authority says it or something like that, or it's true because it's the oldest, or it's true because of X, Y, or Z. But we believe it's true for these reasons. We had some sort of foundation for that. And then we actually tested it out And the same thing is true of things like the color scales. A lot of those were derived through clairvoyant, or we might think of like kind of scrying investigation by MacGregor Mathers and his wife, Mina Mathers. So that's an interesting kind of modern thing, that it's not about relying on a necessarily or completely relying on a tradition or an authority, but there's also an intention to practically test these things. And of course, Crowley picks up on that theme and, on 19th century science in general, and really runs with that. So I just thought that was an interesting note that Westcott makes this thing about it. Their correspondence is being tested clairvoyantly. Let's see, it looks like somebody's put a question in here. Let's see, Chad said he had a quick question about the last class. Let's see. Yeah, no, this is fine. We haven't really gotten started yet, so this is a good time for a question. Let's see. He said, you've mentioned that the associations of the planets to the double letters used by the Golden Dawn is found in no version of the Sefer Yetzirah. What is your personal opinion on this? Should we continue to follow the GD's associations, or should we try to get back to the original Hebrew? It seems weird to tell the Hebrews that we know their letter associations better than they do. Yeah, I mean, my personal opinion is, well, I guess I'll say a few things. First of all, I don't know that there is like an original. I think that there's a variety of interpretations. And, if you want to talk about original and things like that, most, or at least many, Hebrew Kabbalists today are using the Ari and Gra versions, which are actually later than some of the attributions to the letters like found in Christian Kabbalah. So if we want to talk about original or something like that, most contemporary Jewish Kabbalists are not doing the original attributions. The Ari Gra version, they actually changed the attributions in the Sefer Yetzirah to fit closer to the Zohar. And of course, they would claim that things like the Zohar actually goes back into biblical times and things like that. But most scholars will tell you that the Zohar was written in the 13th or maybe early 14th century. So I think that one way that we can deal with this is just by kind of rejecting the idea of there being like an original. There's no agreement, again, between these different versions. So there's not like, even if we were going to sort of go back to the Hebrew versions or something like that, it wouldn't even be clear which one to go back to. And as I said, some of the attributions in Renaissance era manuscripts, by Christian Kabbalists are actually older than like the Gra version. So those type of arguments become extremely complicated. As to my just sort of personal opinions and feelings, I think that that our tradition does it great, and it works great for our tradition. I think that these types of things are, what's the word I'm looking for? Traditions share things, and things change over time. And when there's cultural exchange and things like that happens, things end up getting reconfigured to fit different purposes. Actually, this is something I was actually going to talk about anyways before we got started. So I'll just transition to it now. One thing that I was noticing in going through like Kaplan's translation and his commentary, that it seems like in a lot of cases, and another thing I would say too, of course, is that a lot of the Jewish Kabbalistic tradition is an adaptation of the. Greek Kabbalah is sort of an anachronistic term, right? Because Kabbalah is a Hebrew word. But they're taking these sort of Greek correspondences and then adapting them to Hebrew. So if you really want to trace back to an original, like maybe you'd have to go back to Greek or something like that. And there are people who are doing that. What's his name? Nick Farrell has written in his blog and so that about trying to go back to some of the Greek Kabbalah and things like that, though he still uses Hebrew Kabbalah as well. So, there's that sort of issue too. But anyways, I was going to say, it seems like, and Kaplan kind of, he doesn't directly address this, but he sort of talks around this idea that when the Sefer Yetzirah and the kind of Hebrew esoteric tradition sort of gets started, they're adapting things that they're getting from pagan traditions, Greek and sort of Hellenistic Egypt, and that they are kind of taking those things and fitting them into their systems, and especially with biblical texts and things like that. And so they're sort of adapting something to fit what they're doing. And so it makes sense that when kind of Christian Kabbalah and to Hermetic Kabbalah, that some of these things, I don't know necessarily returning or anything like that, but that because there's some cultural sort of, I don't know exactly the specifics of it, but there's at least at certain times in Jewish culture, there's some like cultural taboos around the practice of astrology and around doing astrological calculations. So it seems like what's happening, in at least some cases, is a kind of construction of like an analog to astrology. Like there was a method of determining like what sign someone was ruled by, sign and planet someone was ruled by doing like by doing gematria. You would add up the person's name, and then there's a kind of mathematical calculation that's used to then determine what like sign and planet that person is ruled by. And so it's like doing astrology, but without actually looking at the sky or the position of the planets. Again, I don't know all the specifics about how that changes over the centuries and things like that. But there is a kind of uncomfortability within the Jewish tradition with astrology, and part of that, of course, has to do with the prohibition against, and the strong prohibition against like icon worship, idolatry. Right, they're very worried about the possibility of people beginning to worship, planets and stars as spiritual powers. Whereas in the pagan tradition, that this happens, right? The planets and stars are seen as genuine spiritual powers, even if, there's a kind of conception of them deriving from a one or something like that. So that has to be sort of modified to fit in with the Hebrew, monotheistic tradition. So in coming out of that into Christian Kabbalah and into Hermetic Kabbalah, it makes sense that things could be kind of realigned, to fit more with a tradition that's more comfortable with astrology and with astrological practice and with, working with different gods and things like that, and other things as well. Like tarot, became part of the Hermetic Kabbalistic tradition in the kind of late 18th into early 19th century, and so it makes sense that the tradition sort of adapts and changes, as it evolves, and for different purposes, for different audiences, and different contexts, and all of that. So the short answer is no. I don't think that there's any. It's kind of interesting to look at how other branches of the Kabbalistic tradition do things and to compare and contrast. And there might be certain applications that we can, kind of share ideas and things like that, and that might be valuable. But I don't think that there's any sort of a going back or anything like that. But thank you. That's a really excellent question, and I was going to address some of that anyways. So perfect. But let's see. Oh, one other thing I wanted to mention is last week we were talking about planets, and you may have noticed that we only talked about the 7 classical planets. I didn't mention the outer planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto was for a while a planet, and a lot of astrologers still work with Pluto. And then, of course, now there's asteroids and other bodies that a lot of astrologers are working with. For Hermetic, for what we're talking about here, for correspondences and all that sort of stuff, the outer planets aren't really relevant. And Crowley's, this is actually really interesting. If you look at the book that Crowley sort of did, well, he ghost wrote a book on astrology for a woman named Evangeline Adams. And he, in that book, the way he presents it is he keeps all the traditional, we will talk about traditional sign rulership in a little while today. So he keeps the traditional sign rulership, and the idea that the 7 planets, what's sometimes called the septenary, the 7 classical planets, that remains a really core thing. And then you can sort of also add in the other planets, outer planets, and look at them, but they're not of the same type, and they're not of the same significance. And by using them as things like sign rulers and things like that, you kind of mess up some of the traditional sort of geometric structure and the clarity of that thing. And we'll look at some of that today too. So I just wanted to kind of make a note about that we're using just the classical planets here, but that's not to say that the others can't have a place like in astrology and in astrological readings. It's just that it's not the core part of the system of symbolism. Crowley does do some interesting things with the outer planets, though. So his book, The General Principles of Astrology, it has some really interesting stuff to say about the outer planets. And I've heard from the opinion of a couple of astrologers who say that for the time that it was written, his take on the outer planets is actually really quite excellent. That's continued to develop since Crowley's time, but for a kind of early entry into that discussion, he wrote the book in, I think, 1915. So yeah, interesting stuff to look at. Let's see. I'll move on to the next slide here. All right, so here was our correspondences. This is the page from the cipher manuscript, or Darcy Quince sort of cleaned up page translated and cleaned up page of the cipher manuscript. And then I went ahead and made the change for the Hey-Zadi switch, right? The change in attribution between the letters Hey and Zadi. And so here we got our 3 divisions of the letters into mothers, doubles, and single letters. So again, 2 weeks ago we talked about the mother letters attributed to the elements. Last week we talked about the double letters attributed to the 7 planets. And so this week we'll be talking about the 12 single letters. And as I think I've mentioned before, as we'll see in Kaplan's translation here, he's going to refer to them as the elementals, but just be clear that he's not referring to like the 4 elements or something like that. It's elemental in the sense of like basic or something like that. So another interesting thing too, and the reason that I think one of the reasons anyways that this sort of sequence of presentation works so well is that we're going to see with the zodiac and the meaning of the signs of the zodiac, that they in a way are going to rely on some basic understanding of the knowledge of both the elements and the planets, so that the zodiac signs are in a way kind of composite, where the elements and the planets are kind of like pure expressions of something. The zodiac, or in the signs of the zodiac, are something a little bit more like complex and composite. One other thing here too is I'm using tropical astrology here, and the kind of the rationale and some of the theoretical, not just what date the sun enters the signs, where they're placed in the zodiac, but also some of the rationale and conceptual rationale behind what the signs of the zodiac are and what they mean. I'm definitely coming from a tropical perspective here. So a sidereal astrologist would probably disagree with some of the things I'm going to say here. Just something to keep in mind. Okay, yeah, I think we can get started here. Okay. Oh, right. So again, here's the that same page again with the 3 different classes of letters colored. Again, the colors don't mean anything here, just sort of arbitrarily chose them. The mother letters are in red, the double letters are in green, and these single letters are in blue. So we'll be talking about the 12 letters in blue here today. And as you can see, they are arranged, the signs are arranged except for the Hey-Zadi switch, the signs are arranged in order. So this is something that, again, other than the Hey-Zadi switch, this is something that doesn't really change a lot. There's not a lot of controversy about this. The different versions of the Sefer Yetzirah all do it in the same way. And again, other than that one change, because of Crowley's, his interpretation of the statement in the Book of the Law that Zadi is not the star, he did make that change. But it's way more consistent, like I was talking about last week with the double letters. Different versions of the Sefer Yetzirah and different Hebrew Kabbalah traditions do the planets in completely different ways from each other. There's a lot of different versions, but with the signs of the zodiac, it's much more consistent. All right, so let's just jump right into the Sefer Yetzirah. So we'll be looking at chapter 5 today. And finishing up with the Sefer Yetzirah today. There is a 6th chapter, which was probably originally a commentary that eventually just became chapter 6. There's some interesting stuff in it, but it's not super on topic, and a lot of it's just kind of review. So I'm not going to talk about the sixth chapter, but we'll look at chapter 5 on the single letters. Sorry. Okay, 12 elementals: Hey, Vav, Zayin, Heth, Tef, Yod, Lamed, Nun, Samek, Ayin, Zadi, Kof. Their foundation is speech, thought, motion, sight, hearing, action, coition, smell, sleep, anger, taste, laughter. All right, so again, as I said last week, the spellings of the letters vary. There's no one standard way of transliterating Hebrew. So especially in kind of Hermetic Kabbalistic texts, you'll see some of these spelled differently. Like Yod we usually spell it Y-O-D and pronounce it like Yod rather than Yod. The Tav at the end of Heth and Tef is usually pronounced sort of soft in our tradition. So you just kind of have to get used to some of that variance. Now these 12 qualities here, these 12 qualities are given in different orders and different versions of it. So like in the short version, these qualities are in a different order. So don't start thinking, oh, okay, speech is attributed to Hey, thought is attributed to Vav, like that won't match like the short version. But these qualities are not particularly important in the Hermetic Kabbalistic tradition. If you look at the short version ordering and think of them as like ordered by the zodiac, there actually are a couple of interesting places where it actually seems to work fairly well, but it's not particularly important. One thing worth noting here is that there's no, like last week we saw that you had the 12 main qualities, and then kind of like some of them are sort of like an opposite or a shadow or a contrary or something like that. There's nothing like that here. You just have the 12 qualities. And that's because these are single and not double. And of course, the linguistic idea behind the single letters is that they have only a single pronunciation. The word coition there, if you're not familiar with that, it's just the same word as coitus. And Westcott, in his version, translates it as sexual love. So that's what we're talking about there. The others are all obvious. All right, move on to verse 2. 12 elementals. He, Vav, Zayin, Heth, Teth, Yod, Lamed, Nun, Samek, Ayin, Zadi, Kof. Their foundation is the 12 diagonal boundaries. The east upper boundary, the east northern boundary, the east lower boundary, the south upper boundary, the southeastern boundary, the south lower boundary, the west upper boundary, the west southern boundary, the west lower boundary, the north upper boundary, the northwestern boundary, the north lower boundary. They extend continually until eternity of eternities, and it is they that are the boundaries of the universe. Now, last week, someone had an interesting question last week about the way that the letters were being kind of grouped. And you can see here that the 12 letters are being kind of grouped into 4 sets of 3. And that works well with the seasons. Again, other than the thing with the Hezadi switch, if it weren't for that, they would line up with the seasons. So the first 3 would correspond with spring, the next 3 with summer, and so on. Okay, now we've got these attributions to the boundaries here, right? So this is talking about the cube of space, or this is interpreted, and used to construct the cube of space. Now, the exact ordering that you just saw on that last screen doesn't match the ordering used in the short version, and it was the short version that's used to construct the cube of space, which you are now looking at. So you can just see that the 12 boundaries, the 12 edges where the faces of the cube meet. And so they're attributed to the 12 single letters, to the signs of the zodiac, and to the tarot as well. And so you can see them there. We're not really going to talk about this too much. There's not really a whole lot to say. One thing I will note is that most sort of books and things like that on the cube of space are working in a more straight Golden Dawn tradition, and so don't include the Hey Zadi switch. But a few Thelemic texts that I have seen and kind of Thelemites using the cube of space, they've tended to leave the zodiacal attributions in the tarot attributions where they are in the cube, and instead move the letters Hey and Zadi. So like you'll see here let's see what that be. The east northern boundary there is attributed to Aries, and so that would be in the Golden Dawn. That would be the letter Hey. And then you see the upper southern boundary there is attributed to Aquarius. And so that would be, the letter Zadi, right, in the Golden Dawn tradition. But what most Thelemites, anyways, that I've seen have left Aries and the Emperor as the northeastern boundary, and have left, Aquarius and the Star as the south upper boundary, and have just moved the letters Hey and Zadi. So just something to be aware of. The nice part about that is it makes the cube of space a lot easier to use. You don't have to kind of remember that whenever you're reading Golden Dawn sources. As if you're going to use the Thelemic correspondences, as you need to get used to doing when reading Golden Dawn texts and things like that, you have to remember that there is this Hezadi switch. And while we're on the subject of that, I'll say that when that happens, when that Hezadi switch, most of because the actual astrological attributions of Aries and Aquarius, because those change, most of the attributions also, other correspondences and things like that, also change, because you could think of them as more closely connected to the astrological sign than to the letter itself. The only thing that really doesn't change is things directly connected to the letter, like the numerical value of the letter, what the letter means, any other kind of direct associations to the letter itself. Most attributions like hierarchies, stones, plants, colors, other things like that. Most of that is closer attached to the zodiacal sign, and so that moves with signs, if that makes sense. Okay, well, we'll just move on there. Okay, verse 3. 12 elementals. He, Vav, Zayin, Heth, Tef, Yod, Lamed, Nun, Samek, Ayin, Zadi, Kov. Their foundation is that he engraved them, carved them, permuted them, weighed them, and transformed them. And with them he formed 12 constellations in the universe, 12 months in the year, and 12 directors in the soul, male and female. So we've seen a lot of this language before, all this stuff about engraving, carving, permuting. I've talked about that a few times already. And we've also seen this sort of format here, and with them he formed, like we saw with the three mother letters. There was the three mothers in the universe, three mothers in the year, three mothers in the soul. And then last time with the double letters, we saw the 7 planets in the universe, 7 days in the year being the 7 days of the week. And then the, forget exactly what the wording was there, but the 7 like the orifices in the face there, the eyes, nostrils, ears, and mouth. So we've got a similar kind of setup here again. We're looking at those letters applied to 3 things: to the universe, to the year, and to the soul. All right, so 12 constellations in the universe: Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, Leo, Virgo, Libra, Scorpio, Sagittarius, Capricorn, Aquarius, and Pisces. And then you can see in parentheses there, you've got the Hebrew name of each one of the signs, and then the translation. So you can see the translations of the Hebrew are almost the same. The Hebrew word for Aquarius is water drawer, rather than like water bearer, which is the more standard meaning. Pisces, apparently Dagon is singular, the fish, rather than like fishes. But so it's very slight variations, but basically exactly the same meanings, the familiar 12 signs of the zodiac. All right, we'll move on here. If people have questions or anything, I saw a couple people typing there, feel free to just jump in. And if you have a question about a slide that I've moved on from, I'm happy to go back or something like that. So yeah, feel free. Let's see, we've got a question. Let's see. No apologies. Questions are good. It's hard to remember exactly sort of what to say or what needs to be addressed. So I appreciate questions. Let's see. Jim Eshelman, who is Phil Seckler's student, uses sidereal and swears that it's the only system that shows real results. I assume Phil Seckler also did likewise, and that thus David Shoemaker did too. Does the Temple of the Silver Star not use sidereal? Yes, that's Jim Eshelman definitely uses sidereal, and that is his preference. And the idea that it's the only real one is his opinion. Phyllis did not use sidereal. I can imagine there might have been arguments there between them or something like that. I don't know. But no, Phyllis definitely used tropical. And I won't comment about what David uses personally, but the Temple of the Silver Star doesn't take an official stance. Students and things like that are free to use either system. And are encouraged to experiment with both and to look into both. So we don't have an official position. I use tropical, and it makes more sense to me. But there's no official position. So yeah, a good question. Thanks. Let's see. Joseph says the 4 groupings of the 3 letters. Solomonic high priests were the ephod, or 12 stones in the breastplate representing the 12 tribes of Israel, and 4 rows of 3. Does any literature comment on this being a possible connection? Yeah, it does. And actually, I'm glad you mentioned the 12 tribes. That's something that you will see in some like old Golden Dawn sources. You'll see the attributions of the 12 signs of the zodiac to the 12 Hebrew tribes. It's not really relevant for our tradition, but yeah, they do all of those attributions. I don't know a huge amount about the breastplate, but I know I've seen kind of attribution systems that work with what is at least conjectured to have been the 12 different stones and the symbolism of those stones. So yes, absolutely connected. And yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up because I wanted to mention the the tribes, because like I said, you will see that in some Golden Dawn texts and diagrams. Okay, so 12 months in the year. I'm not going to bother trying to pronounce these and just butchering the Hebrew names of the months, but these are just the Hebrew names for the 12 months. Nisan roughly corresponds with the sun being in Aries. It usually starts towards the end of March. And we'll talk a little bit more about calendars as we go on, but these are just the Hebrew names for the 12 months of the year. But yeah, it's worth noting that Nisan, roughly the first month, roughly corresponds with the sun's entry into Aries. All right, and then 12 directors in the soul, male and female. The 2 hands, the 2 feet, the 2 kidneys, the gallbladder, the intestines, the liver, the corkiban, the kiva, the spleen. So again, this male and female is just referring to the soul. I'm not sure why that was such a distinction. Must have been some sort of tradition about men and women having different types of soul or something like that. But in this case, they're the same. I don't know about that, but yeah, it's just saying that this applies to both is all that's being said. Okay, and so now you've got 12 parts of the body here that are corresponding to the 12 letters. A couple of those might be unfamiliar parts of the body. The corkiban is a word normally only used to refer to animals. It's not usually used as a part of human anatomy. It's something like the gizzard in fowl, ducks, chickens, turkeys. Yeah, it's the gizzard. And then the kiva is normally the term used for the fourth stomach in like ruminants, like cows or sheep or whatever, and that's where the rennet glands are, in the fourth stomach. So there's a lot of different interpretations of what those things are doing here. Some people have thought that they do refer to parts of the body, and there's been different interpretations. They've all both been interpreted as the stomach or like a different part of the intestines or some other part of the viscera. Others have thought that it actually does refer to that organ in animals. And as I may have mentioned in the first or second class, in the traditions around the Sefer Yetzirah about it being used for creation, animals are created. I think is it ox or cows, I think, that are created at some point. So it's possible that these actually do refer to the organs in animals and are used when the Sefer Yetzirah was apparently used for the creation of animals, which are sometimes thought of as literal, or physical, actual animals created, and sometimes as something like subtler and immaterial. Some have also interpreted in like Jim Eshelman's his translation of the Sefer Yetzirah. He interprets this to mean that they are sort of subtle organs, not physical organs, but part of the subtle body. Though he doesn't really expound on that, but I really want to know what your subtle gizzard is. But anyways, this is totally not relevant to our tradition, but I will talk about something that is sort of equivalent, that uses the 12 signs and 12 regions of the body, and yeah, we'll talk about that later, a kind of equivalent thing from our tradition. Oh, and then in verses 7 through 10, it then goes through in a very sort of similar sequence to what we briefly looked at last week, where you've got kind of, and he took, hay and made it, king over whatever, and bound a crown to it and made it, like lord over, Aries in the universe and Nisan in the year, and right, like, and you go through all the individual interpretations, or not interpretations, but attributions to each letter. But they're different than what we use. So we kind of looked at that pattern last time, so I'm not going to dwell on it here. So we'll just move on. Okay, so I want to do, hopefully this won't take too long or be too confusing, but I just want to sort of briefly give a kind of introduction to what the zodiac is, and of just a few things about it. So doing some ultra brief and probably oversimplified astronomy here. Here you've got the Earth in the center, and you'll see that a couple of things here. So the pole here, right, this is being extended from our pole, the points around which the Earth like rotates. Extended, if you just sort of extend the north-south pole axis like out into space, that becomes the north celestial pole and the south celestial pole. And then if you extend our equator, the equator around the Earth, it could just sort of project that like out into the universe. That's called the celestial equator. Now you have the ecliptic, which is the apparent path that the sun takes over the course of a year, not over the course of a day, but over the course of a year. The sun appears, from our perspective, to follow this path that defines the ecliptic. And you can see that the ecliptic, the sun's path, is inclined to the celestial equator by about 23.5 degrees. And you'll see that the points, that sort of represents the sun's position relative to the relative to the ecliptic from our point of view. Those points define the summer, the solstices, and the equinoxes. Just a note for anyone who in the southern hemisphere, for everyone, but particularly for anyone in the southern hemisphere listening to this, that that's all going to be this is all going to be backwards from your point of view. What I call the summer solstice is going to be what you call the winter solstice, and then same thing with the equinoxes. Yeah. So this is I'm doing a kind of northern hemisphere terminology here, but just be aware of that. All right, very similar diagram to the one that you just saw, except that now instead of the Earth's celestial axis being oriented sort of up and down, it's now inclined at here. This is a slightly more accurate number of 23.45 degrees. It just gets rounded off to 23.5. But so you'll see that now the celestial equator is kind of at an angle from the way our diagram is oriented, and the ecliptic is on the horizontal there. And you can see that this is the Earth sort of rotating around the sun there. And so you can see from this diagram here, the Earth is in this configuration at the summer solstice, and you can tell that because well, okay, let me back up slightly. So all of as the sun, or as the Earth rotates around the sun here, all of the other parts of the diagram, the celestial pole, the ecliptic, the celestial equator, that all sort of moves with the Earth and is relative to the Earth. And so you can tell that this would be the summer solstice that this diagram is occurring on, because if you kind of draw a line from the Earth through the sun to the ecliptic, it's at its highest inclination above the celestial equator. So that's the summer solstice. And you can see when it would be over here, when the sun from the Earth's perspective would be over on the left side of the diagram over here, that would be the winter solstice. And then at the points where the ecliptic crosses the celestial equator, those are the equinox points. All right, again, very similar diagram. I'm just kind of throwing out a few here to hopefully, if that helps, to look at a few different ones. Again, this is from the Earth is at the center here. And then you can kind of imagine the dotted line there being the apparent movement of the sun throughout the year. And so when it's at its highest point above the equator, that's the summer solstice. When it crosses the equator, that's the equinoxes. And then it's the lowest point below the equator, that's at the winter solstice. And again, that's all opposite from the southern hemisphere because it would be above the celestial equator from the point of view of someone in the southern hemisphere. And then you can see how the ecliptic moves throughout the course of the year. So you've got a little person here, just sort of standing on the surface of the Earth. And then the green circle would be sort of like the horizon, from their point of view. And you can see how the position of the ecliptic in the sky changes over the course of the year because of the inclination of the Earth's axis. So you see that at the equinoxes, about half of the ecliptic is above the horizon and half below. That's why the nights and days are of equal length. And the sun rises more or less in the east and sets more or less in the west. And then at the summer solstice, the sun is rising and setting further north, and a bigger portion of the circle is above the horizon. So the day is going to be longer and the night shorter. And then the opposite is going to be true at the winter solstice, where more of the ecliptic is going to be below the horizon. And so the sun will be above the horizon for a shorter portion of the day. It doesn't get as high in the sky, right? Like this would be the highest in the sky it will get, right around solar noon. And also the angle is different too, right? The angle of the sun's rays, which is partially why it's colder in the winter. And then, so again, that was all just about the Earth's relationship to the sun. But because the planets in the solar system, except for Pluto, although Pluto's not a planet any longer. The other planets, they all lie more or less on a flat disk. And so what this ends up meaning is that not only does the sun, so the sun kind of defines the ecliptic, wherever the sun's path is, that is the ecliptic, but all the other planets move more or less along the ecliptic as well. Some vary more than others. I think Saturn varies the least, which is very consistent with the nature of Saturn. Mercury is pretty variable. Our moon, more or less, follows the ecliptic as well, though the moon's orbital plane is inclined at, I think, 5 degrees to the ecliptic, which is, well, anyways, that inclination is why you don't get an eclipse at every new and full moon, because sometimes the moon is above or below the ecliptic. The node points, like the north and south node or the head and tail of the dragon, those are the points where the plane of the moon's orbit intersects with like the plane of the ecliptic. So the point here, the important point, is that the sun, as well as all 7 classical planets, they are all going to follow this more or less the same path in the sky called the ecliptic. They're not going to be found in other parts of the sky. Okay, so we can talk a little bit about calendars. So the year is a solar thing, right? A year is defined by the, kind of in a geocentric perspective, that the time that it takes the sun, to go all the way around the ecliptic, right, all through all 12 signs and come back to the place where it started. Or, from a heliocentric perspective, this is the time it takes the Earth to orbit the sun, and it's approximately 365.24 days. That fraction, of course, is why we have leap years, and the fact that fraction is a little bit less than 0.25 is why, 3 out of every 4 years divisible by 100, we don't do a leap year. So like in 2000, there should have been a leap year, but there wasn't. So that's the year. The year is defined by our relationship to the sun and our orbit around the sun, or from our perspective, the sun's movement through the cosmos. Now, months are defined, or maybe not defined, but the idea of a month in that period comes from the lunar cycle. But there's 2 different ways of sort of talking about the lunar month. There's this sidereal lunar month, which is about 27.3 days. And then there's also the synodic lunar month, which is 29.5 days. And I'll sort of draw kind of a little bit of a diagram so that you can see a little bit of what that means, what the difference is there. And I think that'll help clarify some other things as well. And then we can also see the week, which is about approximately a quartering of the synodic lunar month, right? And so that gives you 7 days. And then, those 7 days, of course, are attributed to the planets. So let's see, I'm gonna switch. Okay, so here we've got our zodiac wheel. I'll talk about the, we'll talk about the glyphs and the specific signs in a few minutes. But I just want to really quickly show you the idea of the synodic and versus sidereal lunar month. Now, the word sidereal here doesn't have anything to do with sidereal astrology. It just means like sidereal is just like the means of the stars or relative to the stars. So if we have say we have a new moon in Aries, right? And so we've got like the sun. That's really big there. Yeah, let's pretend that's the sun. Maybe I can do that better, actually. That looks silly. Oh, well, whatever. So yeah, so you've got the sun in Aries, and then we've also got, I don't know, the moon in Aries, right? Let's do blue. And so this is a new moon because they're conjoined. And then, so the sidereal lunar month will be the time that it takes for the moon to go all the way around the zodiac and rejoin the point where it started. So it'll move, from Aries to Taurus to Gemini to Cancer, all the way around, and then come back to like the middle of Aries where it started. So that'll take about 27.3 days, and so that's a sidereal lunar month because it's the moon's returning to its original location relative to the stars. But what's happened over the course, and so, that again is 27.3 days. And so what's happened over the course of that 27.3 days is that the sun has also moved around the ecliptic. So now the sun, it will have moved about 27 degrees. And so now the sun will be, over here in Taurus. So when it comes back around, now we started at the new moon, but when it comes back around, it won't be the new moon anymore because they're not conjoined. It'll be a waning crescent, but not new. And so the moon will have to move from Aries over there to Taurus before the moon can be new again. And that'll take just a little more than 2 days. And so that'll be your 29.5. So the synodic month is the moon's cycle relative to the sun, which is going all the way around the zodiac plus a little bit extra. And now this will happen again. Now the moon will take another 27.3 days to go around the zodiac and will come back to Taurus. But then the sun will have moved on to Gemini, and so then the moon will have to move and conjoin the sun. For the next new moon will be in Gemini. All right, let's see. Let's switch back here to the presentation. Okay, so you should all be seeing, let's say, like year, month types of calendars. Someone let me know if you're not seeing that, but you should be. Okay, so the top part here is what you just saw. So because of that cycle, because of the way that that sort of patterning of new moons, or a full, it works with full moons as well. Most lunar calendars begin with the new moon, so I'm just using that. So over the course of a solar year, the 365-ish days, you'll have approximately 12 new moons. And so this sort of gives the idea of 12 months in a year, and also helps to define the 12 signs of the zodiac as the kind of 12 stations along the year. Right, you sort of these 12 moons, either new or full, however you want to think about it, happening, in sort of 12 locations around the ecliptic over the course of a year. So, okay, let's talk about types of calendars really briefly. Again, I don't know if I said this a few minutes ago, but in the sort of Sefer Yetzirah, right, it talks about the 12 single letters in the universe, and then the 12 single letters in the year. And so sort of parallel to the 7 planets in the universe, and then the 7 days of the week. And those things were totally independent of each other, right? That was the application of this sort of 7-fold system to 3 different things. But when we start talking about the signs of the zodiac, the 12 months of the year and the 12 signs of the 12 constellations or the 12 signs of the zodiac, those are not independent things. The 12 months of the year and the fact that there are 12 signs of the zodiac are not independent facts. You can think of the zodiac itself being formed on the lunar cycle. Obviously, the lunar cycle and the solar cycle defines years and months. So here, kind of time and space become sort of related to each other. They're not independent things. Though, of course, they are, thinking of the 12 constellations in the universe, that's a spatial thing, right? We're thinking of a kind of image of the totality, what in a geocentric cosmology would be the outermost sphere, the limits of the universe. And then, thinking about the 12 months in the year, this is about the cycles of time and the rhythms of seasons and the rhythms of the waxing and waning of the moon. So, they have a different sense and a different significance, but they're not independent things. Okay, so real brief, we'll talk about 3 types of calendars. So solar calendars, that's basically what we have. Our civil calendar is, we use a leap year to approximate, or to get very close actually to the solar cycle. And so our days don't drift off. I mean, there's a little bit of variance year to year, for mostly just because of that fractional day there. But it doesn't drift. We stay more or less anchored to the seasons and to the equinoxes and solstices. So we have a solar calendar, and the moon has absolutely nothing to do with it. I mean, although the moon might be the original idea, or the kind of the genesis of the idea of the month, the moon's phase has absolutely nothing to do with our civil calendar. But the oldest form of calendars would have been lunar calendars. It's difficult. You have to develop some astronomy to be able to know where the sun is, because you can't just look up at the sky and see what constellation the sun is in, because the sun is so bright that you can't see anything else when it's above the horizon. So it's more difficult to know the location of the sun, but much easier to know the location of the moon. And just sort of easier to track for other reasons. So the earliest calendars would have been lunar calendars. Now you do have purely lunar calendars. An example of this is like the Muslim calendar is a purely lunar calendar. So their calendar just uses 12 lunar phases as the year. Now, if you look at, well, if you sort of do the math out, the synodic month of 29 and a half days, if you have 12 of those, it ends up being, I think it's about 354 days long is 12 lunar months. And so that's off from the solar year by about 11 days. So what that means is that if you use a purely lunar calendar, your lunar months are going to drift back. They'll start like approximately 11 days earlier each year. And so this happens like with the Muslim calendar. It just processes around the year, each month starting relative to the solar cycle 11 days earlier each year. And you also have what are called lunisolar calendars. Now, the Hebrew calendar is an example of this. The Chinese calendar is another example of this as well, which is basically a lunar calendar, except that you don't let it drift too far from the solar. And so what you end up doing is usually every 3 years, but sometimes every 2. You do it, I think, was it 7 times every 19 years? You add like a leap month, because you lose or you drift by about 11 days a year. After 3 years, you've drifted by about a month. And so you add like an extra month so that you don't like process all the way around. So the Hebrew calendar and the Chinese calendar are both well-known examples of that. And so that's why the Hebrew calendar, although it is a lunar calendar, Nisan always remains sort of more or less at the end of March, because it drifts and then is reset and drifts and is reset. Okay, so hopefully that was helpful. I'm just going to keep moving on. So we've still got a bunch of things to go here. So the ecliptic, right, is just this circle, the kind of imaginary, the path that the sun takes over the course of a year. And circles are divided into 360 degrees, which is probably not independent of the fact that the year is 365 days long. The Babylonians divided the circle into 360 degrees. They may have known actually that the year was 365 days and not 360, but they used a base 60 number system. So it was a lot easier for them to do certain calculations by using 360 degrees rather than 365. But anyways, so what all this kind of works out to, or what we get out of all of this, is that the ecliptic is going to be divided up into 12 equal sections of 30 degrees each. And this is something this is the Babylonians do this. And the Hellenistic astrology is the inheritor of that tradition, and so on. And so the constellations themselves are, let's see, what is my next slide here? No, I don't want to do that yet. So the constellations themselves are not equal in size. Some of them are much larger than others. Like Virgo is more than 30 degrees, like Libra and Cancer are less than 30 degrees. So if you kind of split up the ecliptic into equal 30-degree sections, the signs of the zodiac, some of them like overlap. The actual constellations kind of overlap into other signs. Some of them are smaller, and so on. So it's not the constellations that define the ecliptic, I guess, is what I was trying to get at with all of that. That it has to do with the cycles of the year and our relationship to the moon and to the sun. That these things, in my understanding anyways, are more about what defines the year than about just the constellations themselves. Though which constellation is in which sign, of course, is how the signs are named and gives some of their significance, though not a huge amount, actually, the symbolism of the constellations. But anyway, so this is what we'll be talking about signs. And again, I'm talking about this from a tropical perspective. A siderealist would say, kind of, no, it really is about the constellations and so on. There is a thing called constellational astrology that doesn't divide up the signs evenly. It actually uses the actual signs of the constellations, so that the sun is in certain signs much longer than in others, but that's different than sidereal. Sidereal keeps the idea of each being 30 degrees, each sign being 30 degrees. They just like keep them anchored to the signs as the precession of the equinoxes goes on. But tropical remains the anchoring to the equinoxes and solstices. Okay, so 12 signs of the zodiac, 12 constellations. So for whatever reason, this is an old woodcut from, I think, a 16th century woodcut. For some reason, it starts with Aquarius and Pisces, but we'll just start talking about Aries here. So that's Aries. Aries is the ram. You can see the glyph of Aries just above his head there. And Taurus is the bull. I'm not entirely sure what's happening there on the right-hand side of Taurus. That's actually probably because of the constellation. That the bull doesn't. If you're familiar with the constellation Taurus, it makes sense. And then there's the glyph of Taurus right above the bull's head. And you got Gemini, the twins, and there's the glyph of Gemini. Then Cancer, the crab. Although you noticed in a lot of these kind of medieval into Renaissance era texts that their crabs tend to look a lot more like lobsters. I don't know what that's all about, but yeah. And then Leo, the lion. Virgo is often called the virgin, but I think maiden is really probably a better kind of term for it. That the fact that it's a young woman is more significant than whether or not she's had sex, I think. You got Libra, the scales. Scorpius or Scorpio, the scorpion. Sagittarius, the archer, who's depicted as a centaur. And then Capricorn, or I think that says Capricornus, kind of Latin name there, the goat. Sometimes also, I think this is coming from the Babylonian tradition, sometimes like the sea goat. So you'll sometimes see a kind of, looks like a goat mermaid, basically, for Capricorn. Sometimes Capricorn just the goat, sometimes the sea goat. I think sea goats are pretty cool. Then now jumping back up to the top left here, we got Aquarius, the water bearer, and finally Pisces, the fishes. So there are 12 constellations and the 12 names of the signs. Okay, and then here, this is looking at showing you a couple of things here. One just shows you the actual constellations and what they look like there. Of course, remember that this is a totally abstracted diagram here. The actual stars that make up the constellations are very often nowhere near each other. Some of them, they can be hundreds of light years apart. So they're not actually like this in the universe or something like that, just from our perspective. And you can also see this is sort of an illustration of what the arrows there is kind of showing you like what Sun in Leo means. Would be that from the Earth's perspective, if you were to draw a line, going from the Earth into the sun and then out sort of through the sun and continuing on, you would sort of, that line would enter into Leo. Now again, this diagram would sort of be showing like a more of a sidereal kind of perspective because of the precession of the equinoxes. The signs, the actual constellations are no longer in the signs named after them, in tropical astrology, but at least shows you the basic idea there. But I mostly just wanted you to see what the constellations look like. Okay, so moving along. So we've got the idea of 12 constellations and these are 12 divisions of the ecliptic, 12 divisions of the year. And so now we'll look at some of the sort of geometric and conceptual patterning that helps to define or does define the meanings of the 12 signs. So we've got a few different. One thing that's nice about the number 12 and may actually have been significant in the formation of this and why they didn't use like 13, for example. Speaking of 13, this is a slight tangent maybe, but you'll sometimes see the idea that there's a 13th sign of the zodiac called Ophiuchus, right, the serpent bearer. It is true that Ophiuchus's foot does like cross into the ecliptic. I think it's between Scorpio and Sagittarius. I think it is. Yeah, I think it's between Scorpio and Sagittarius. His foot kind of crosses over into the ecliptic, and so some people are going, there's really a 13th sign of the zodiac or something like that. But again, if we think that the zodiac is defined more about these cycles than by like the constellations, then that's not particularly a significant thing. And the ancients were very aware of that fact, and none of them were troubled by it. But every once in a while, on like local news or something like that, you'll see these headlines going, astronomers add 13th sign of the zodiac or something like that. But anyways, the importance of the number 12, over the number 13 or something like that. One thing that's important and really useful about the number 12 is that it's divisible by a bunch of other numbers. It's divisible by 2, 3, 4, and 6. So you can break it up into different groupings, and the kind of permutations of those groupings are really important, as we're about to see. Okay, so first grouping here, you'll often see it called gender. I'm sort of calling it polarity. Now, it comes out of the polarity of odd and even numbers. As we'll see on the next slide, just sort of number the signs of the zodiac, starting with Aries, 1 through 12. And so the odd signs are conceived of to be masculine and active. Now, I'm calling them yang. I think yang is a better term. I don't really like the gender terminology. I think it's a little outdated and not super useful. And I think also sometimes implies that that's the way the genders are supposed to be, that, women should be passive and men should be active or something like that. And I don't think that was really even what was implied originally. But if you just sort of use yin and yang, you don't have to kind of deal with all of that. And, I think it's more, more fitting with the way that we view sex and gender in our time. So this idea of odd and even being associated with masculine and feminine, this comes out of like Pythagorean symbolism. The monad, the 1, was conceived of as masculine, and then the dyad, the 2, was considered feminine. And there's a bunch of other, I think there's like 9 or 10 different qualities that are associated with oddness and evenness. And so that tradition filters into the formation of Hellenistic astrology. Yeah, so I'll just move on from there. But I'll talk about the polarities there as yang and yin from here on out, or as odd and even. But active and passive are still good, at least for the most part, as long as you don't kind of overly like privilege active as being like better than passive or something like that. Then it can still work. Receptive might be another word that we can use instead of passive, if that's helpful. All right, and then we've got quadruplicities and triplicities. Now, I continue to be confused by this occasionally because quadra means like 4, right? And so one of them is a division of the zodiac into 4 groups of 3, and one's a division into 3 groups of 4. And I always mix myself up about which one is which. But if you just remember that quadruplicity are groups of 4, and triplicities are groups of 3, that's sort of the way you can remember. Once you start studying astrology, once you get into the idea of like triplicities and the triplicity rulers, then it sort of becomes really easy to remember. But yeah, just remember that it's how many things are in the group, not how many groups there are, that defines the word. Okay, so our quadruplicity, our groups of 4, we're going to have 3 qualities, and those are cardinal. Cardinal is sometimes also called movable in some older texts, but cardinal is the most common. And then the middle group, you'll see them called fixed or cherubic or cheruvic. And then the last is called mutable, or in some older texts, you'll see it called double-bodied. But they all mean basically the same thing. It's just different translations of Greek or Latin or whatever. So cardinal, the idea here is of the inception of something new beginning. And that's also why the word movable gets used, is that it's something changing, right? That something emerging. It's often seen as sort of quick, the inception of something. There's a kind of almost a fieriness to it. Crowley actually talks about like the cardinal signs as like the fiery part of whatever element they are. Right. I kind of associate it with like the idea of alchemical sulfur, something, sort of dynamic, something fast, something, coming into being. And then the fixed or cherubic signs, these are sort of stable, just what they are, not really changing. They express their quality in a very pure sort of way, and they're also kind of resistant to change. And probably the most pure expression, of the elements. And that's one of the reasons, anyways, why we can think of that's why they are the cherubic signs or the fixed signs, is because they most directly or most purely, I guess, express those qualities, rather than being about the beginning of that thing. Or the mutable sign is the kind of the end of that thing, the transition into the next thing. Again, like in some of the older texts, it's called double-bodied. The idea being that there's now sort of two things going on, that you have what was happening plus something new sort of coming in. And so because of these sort of groups of four things, each season, right, which is going to be made up of 3 signs or 3 months, is going to begin with a cardinal sign. Then you'll have a fixed sign in the middle of the season, and then a mutable sign at the end of the season. So that's another way of thinking about this too, that the cardinal signs are the start of the season. The fixed sign is like the middle of that season, when you're just sort of really purely and unambiguously just in that season. And then the mutable signs are the kind of the end of that season, the beginning of the transition into the next one. Again, from a 4-season sort of perspective, other cultures have 3 seasons or something like that. This is coming from a kind of Western 4-season perspective. All right, and then you've got triplicities, which are groups of 3. And so now the triplicities actually existed before they were assigned to the elements, but I'm going to sort of leave out that discussion, but it's something interesting to look into. And so the triplicities here are going to be grouped into the 4 elements. And the order we're going to use here is fire, earth, air, and water. Now, we already kind of talked about the meaning of those elements 2 weeks ago, and I'm assuming most of you have a pretty good sense of that already. So we're just going to move on here. Okay, so chart here. On the far left, you've got the sign number, like I was talking about earlier with the odd and even. You can see that Aries is odd, and so that's going to be yang, or active. Taurus is an even number, so that's going to be yin, passive receptive, and so on all the way down. And so you can see the polar. I've listed out the polarities there. It just alternates back and forth between yang and yin, again corresponding with the number. Now we've got the quadruplicities here, cardinal, fixed, mutable, and it's just going to sort of cycle right through cardinal, fixed, mutable, all the way down. And again, that will sort of wrap perfectly around because 12 is divisible by 3. From Pisces, which is a mutable sign, you'll go right back to Aries, which is a cardinal sign. And then your triplicity, fire, earth, air, water, right? Listed in the same way. Now, because you've got a group of 4 and a group of 3, they're kind of off sync with each other. So you get all kind of 12 permutations of the 3 cardinal signs and the 3 cardinal, what am I saying? The quadruplicities and the triplicities. So that you get, 1 cardinal fire, 1 cardinal, air, 1 cardinal water. With the air signs, one of them is cardinal, 1 is fixed, 1 is mutable, and so on. You don't have any repetition there, and it just follows from this simple pattern. Okay, let's see. Maybe I can do this really quickly. So I just wanted to show you, how do I erase that? There we go. Okay, so real quick, I just wanted to show you some of the patterns here with, so with the polarities. So starting with Aries, if you look at like the yang polarity, you would have, 1 second. Let's see, Lex says, would it be wise to assume that the cardinal, fixed, mutable signs also correspond to Shin, Mem, and Aleph? Yeah, sure, you can do that. And yeah, in the order that you've got them in. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, you should be careful about overly associating that, but they certainly correspond. Again, I've really come to think of those things as corresponding with like the 3 alchemical elements of salt, sulfur, and mercury. But salt, sulfur, and mercury correspond quite well with the 3 mothers as well. So yeah, great. Okay, so if we look at, say, like the yang signs, starting from Aries and then coming to, I don't know why this is so fat. It didn't, this line, it didn't used to be like this the last time I did this. That's weird. Anyways. Oh, here we go. I can change it like this. Here we go. That's a little bit better. Okay, so from Aries to Gemini to Leo to Libra to Sagittarius to Aquarius and then back to Aries, right? So you'll see this is connecting up our 6 yang signs. This also defines like the sextile aspect. I'm not going to go into what that is, but if you know what that is, there you go. Things that are sextile to each other are the same polarity. And then obviously you can draw another one in here with all the the yin signs. So it makes a cool kind of pattern there. Let's see. And then with the quadruplicities, so we'll now draw one from all the cardinal signs. So we'll go from Aries, cardinal fire, to Cancer, cardinal water, to Libra, cardinal air, to Capricorn, cardinal earth, and then back to Aries again, and we get a square. Now, with the fixed signs, similar thing will happen. Let's see, where am I? Leo, to Scorpio, to Aquarius, and then back to Taurus again. And then our mutable signs from Gemini to Virgo to Sagittarius to Pisces, right? Mutable fire, mutable water, and then back to mutable air. All right, and then finally with the triplicities, and so that's like the square in opposition aspect you can see there. Because at 90 degrees, the square, and that's we call it square, and you're literally drawing like squares, right? And then finally with the triplicities, if we connect the 3 fire signs, you get a triangle. Sometimes the triplicities are also called trigons. Trigon is just another word for triangle. Right? And the same thing with the 3 earth signs, the 3 air signs, and 3 water signs. So there you go. So you see some of these interesting geometric patterns, and these are quite important for when Hellenistic astrology is being kind of formulated by the Greeks. The nature of these geometric relationships are quite important and significant for them. And I mean, this is the time to go into it now, but those sort of these kind of geometric layout and geometric patterns are really significant. Okay, so now we can talk about the planets in relationship to the signs. So you should now be seeing, I switched back to the presentation, so you should now be seeing a zodiac sign with the planets around the inside. Let me know if you don't see that. Okay, so we're going to talk about the rulers. Each sign of the zodiac is ruled by a planet, and again, I'm using the classical rulership here, so you won't see any. You won't see Uranus, Neptune, or Pluto here. Just the way this was done classically. And so again, this is another place where there's a very distinct pattern that's really helpful to be aware of. So in the 7 classical planets, right, you have the Sun and the Moon, which are the 2 luminaries, the two bright planets. The sources of, the sources of light and illumination. And so those are placed in the year immediately following the summer solstice. So the sun's entry into Cancer is right at the summer solstice. So the luminaries are placed in, so the moon is placed in Cancer and the sun is placed in Leo just after the summer solstice. And then, let's see, yeah, I'll just do it from going out from there. One other thing too is Hellenistic astrology, although it's Hellenistic and is largely done in the Greek language, it largely happens in northern Egypt. So there's a lot of Egyptian influence as well. And the Egyptian New Year is right around the summer solstice in the Heliacal rising of Sirius, which is right before the Nile flood happened, which was obviously the big important event for them each year. So that's their New Year as well. So that's another way of thinking about why the luminaries go in starting in Cancer is because of the Egyptian New Year. So we got Sun and Moon in place now. And then Mercury, which is the closest planet after that, and also Mercury is never more than a sign away from the sun. I think it's like only ever distant by like 28 degrees, I think it is. So then we've got on either side of the sun and moon, we've got Mercury on either side. And then on either side of that, we've got Venus. Venus is never distant from the sun by more than, is it 40 something degrees? I wanted to say, I can't remember exactly. It's about 40 something, so never more than 2 signs distant from the sun. So then on either side of the Mercury ruled signs, you've got Venus ruled signs. And then you just sort of continue out and call day in order. And then so on either side of the 2 Venus ruled signs, you've got 2 Mars ruled signs. On either side of that, you've got 2 Jupiter ruled signs. And then finally, at the very end, the last 2 signs, Aquarius and Capricorn, are ruled by Saturn. And part of what's happened here also is that, like the luminaries went with the brightest part of the year, the Saturn, Saturn has gone with the darkest part of the year. Right, so the winter solstice is like the sun's entry into Capricorn, and so that's the beginning of the darkest part of the year. And then Aquarius is like right in the middle of winter, and so that's Saturn. It's dark and cold. All right, and so that's our pattern of planetary rulership over the signs. Now, I think it's important to realize here that it's not that the planets rule the signs because they're like similar in nature or something like that. It's not that. That like Virgo is ruled by Mercury, or that Mercury rules Virgo because Virgo is like similar in nature to Mercury. It's Virgo is similar in nature to Mercury because it's ruled by Mercury. Like the rulership is influencing the meaning, and the qualities of the sign rather than like the other way around. When the modern planets get attributed, like people say, oh, Uranus rules Aquarius. Or Neptune rules Pisces because of like the similarity in nature. That's a totally different way of thinking about it than from the like the original formation. And again, like Crowley talks about this in his book too. The kind of perfect symmetry and geometry of this is really important. And that by introducing modern rulership, you totally mess this up. Okay, so. We'll switch gears again. Sorry, we're running out of time. We'll probably go a little over our hour and a half. Sorry about that, but there's just like a lot to go through. Okay, so just sort of real briefly here. This is what I'm going to sort of present as a kind of analog to the idea of the 12 directors in the soul from the Sefer Yetzirah, which is something called melaphysia, which is, well, it's a whole bunch of things. It's related to medical astrology. And so there's different sort of ways of doing this. But I'll present you the main system of melaphysia, which is the attributions of the 12 regions of the body to the 12 signs of the zodiac. And so I'll show you a couple of different manuscripts. They're also kind of fun just to look at, so I thought it was just sort of enjoyable. But you can see here he's got like a ram on top of his head, right? Because Aries rules the head. In Taurus, you can see the little bull there, rules the neck. Gemini rules the arms and shoulders, and you can see the 2 twins kind of clinging to his arms there. Cancer, they're just kind of our lobster crab there, rules like the chest and breast. Leo rules like the heart and sides and ribs. And then, let's see, Virgo rules like kind of the abdomen and the lower abdomen. Libra rules like the lower back, buttocks, and hips. Scorpio rules the genitals and then often the anus as well. Sagittarius rules the thighs. Capricorn rules the knees. Aquarius rules the kind of lower shins to ankles, and then Pisces rules the feet. There's a little bit of variation in that. Like sometimes sometimes Aquarius is like just the ankles, and then Capricorn gets more of the lower legs. Sometimes Aquarius gets, there's a little bit of blending, and so especially in the torso too, you'll see slightly different. A little bit of blending in one direction or the other, but pretty consistent. Again, there's also other types of attributions. Like you can do there's attributions to just the internal organs, not like the arms and legs, but like the spleen, the kidneys, the liver, all those like attributed as well. There's planetary rulership over different like processes that happen or different like systems within the body. Like one planet will rule over the blood and the circulation of the blood and things like that. So it's more complex than this, but I just wanted to show you one that was relevant, to the 12 signs of the zodiac, and also the one you're probably most likely to encounter. Here's another one here. I think this one is really funny. The guy looks really unhappy. He's like, I've got a ram on my head. And the Cancer here, this crab is clearly drawn by someone that didn't really know what a crab looked like. I find this really amusing. This guy is like, I'm not okay with what's happening here. Okay, another one here too. And you can see in this one, they include some of the attributions to like the internal organs. So you can see, like Cancer being attributed there to, well, I'm not entirely sure what that is. But you can see, Virgo is kind of the intestines. There must be like the stomach there. Yeah. So you can see they're also doing internal organs there as well. I'm just going to keep moving along. And then this is a Persian drawing from Melethesia as well, which I thought was kind of cool looking. They're actually kind of inside the body. So Gemini is portrayed, you can see, as like these double-headed figures. I thought it was a cool way of representing the Gemini as like a two-headed thing rather than as twins. Yeah. Okay, so we'll just move on from that. Yeah, but that's something you will encounter in different texts and things like that. The idea of like, especially the one I've probably seen the Kabbalists, like Hermetic Kabbalists, get the most use out of is the fact that the head and the genitals are both Mars-ruled signs. So Scorpio rules the genitals and Aries rules the head, and so you can kind of do things with like the raising of the Kundalini energy, from the genital region up to the head and things like that. Yeah. It's also used in like kind of medical kind of applications and things like that too. Like what your rising sign is, or maybe your sun sign will sometimes indicate like certain systems that you can have problems with. People will with a certain will have trouble with their knees or something like that if they're Capricorn rising or sun in Capricorn or whatever, or if you have afflictions to a planet in a sign or something like that. So it's used in medical astrology, but you'll encounter it occasionally in Hermetic Kabbalistic texts. Okay, so kind of synthesizing this kind of stuff together, we can see, so I only did the colors for part of the chart rather than the whole thing like I had done before, and that's because recoloring all the glyphs, these are actually little like PNG files that I dragged and dropped in there, and recoloring them is a huge pain in the ass, and so I didn't do it. But you can kind of pretend that the colors extend all the way across the whole screen there. So on the far left here, I'll mention the colors first. So these are the paths, the paths, these path numberings, the single letters in the King scale. One interesting thing to note is that the colorings in the King scale for the 3 mother letters, the 7 doubles, and the 12 singles, each one is a kind of division of the full spectrum. So the 3 mother letters were, red, yellow, and blue, and then so that's kind of a division of the spectrum into 3, and then with last week, we saw that the colors were like, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. That's like a division of the spectrum into 7. And so now we've got a division into 12. Well, whether or not it's the spectrum or like the kind of more mixed colors is a little bit ambiguous, but we're not going to worry about that here. Okay, so I've got the path numbers on the left, and then the letters next to that, and then the name of the sign, then the glyph of the sign, then the quadruplicity and triplicity, and then the planetary ruler as well. So you can see it all kind of laid out all at once. Let me just, hold on, I'm just gonna click forward and see what else I wanted to talk about before we finish so I can, okay. Yeah, we can probably catch up here and not go too much over. Okay, so I'll just sort of talk one by one. Aries is cardinal fire and is ruled by Mars. And so that really is kind of like what defines Aries, sort of what Aries is. is sort of cardinal fire and ruled by Mars. And you can see, the cardinal signs have this that kind of energy of inception, of beginning. The sun's entry into Aries, of course, is the spring equinox, right? So this is the beginning of spring, the start of life returning. So this is cardinal. It's fiery and it's ruled by Mars, and those are really the kind of the main summarizes really the qualities of the sign. Now the ram, there's kind of, you can add some kind of ram-like symbolism and stuff like that into it, but really the quadruplicity, triplicity, and ruler are the main thing that makes the signs mean what they mean. There's also the exaltations of the planets in the signs as well. There's also the exaltations of the signs as well, though my understanding is that the exaltations have to do more with the nature of the planets and don't really influence the nature of the signs. Now, and that's a little bit more about a sympathy sort of thing. There is a kind of complex pattern about how the exaltations, geometric pattern about how the exaltations happen, but it's a little bit messier. But yeah. So Sun says cardinal signs action-oriented. Action-oriented. And sort of changeable, Aries people are sometimes thought of as people who are good at sort of starting things and getting things going or changing things, but don't necessarily have a lot of follow through. So they can be kind of abrupt and dynamic, but not very consistent, and not good at sort of settling in and just sort of churning away at something like day after day. Now something like that would be something that Taurus would be really good at, right? Taurus is fixed earth. And so that's super stable. Yeah, right. Yeah, because of movement. Oh, right. Sure. And connecting that to Sheen too. Yeah. That's great. Right. So Taurus is fixed Earth. This is about as stable as it gets. And, sort of Taurus people, Taurus rising, Sun in Taurus, Moon in Taurus, these types of people are often seen that way as kind of stubborn, fixed, but also consistent and steady, and ruled by Venus. Taurus people are often said to enjoy comfort and things like that. Like being at home, like being soft clothing, relaxing on the couch and things like that. It's kind of a Taurus-y sort of thing. Sensual pleasures of the body. That's all very Taurus-y. Gemini, again, mutable air, ruled by Mercury. So extremely changeable, extremely variable. Cancer, sort of cardinal water and ruled by the moon. Cancer is very lunar, very watery. Again, as a cardinal sign, it's the beginning of a season. So Cancer is the beginning of summer. Leo is fixed fire. So this is a kind of pure expression, a more pure expression of fire, less violent than Aries. It's also quite solar, right? Ruled by the sun. And the lion works really well there. Some of the other ones work well too, the twins for Gemini. It has that kind of sense of duality. Bulls are kind of heavy, stable, have a lot of momentum. Leo is the lion. Lions are often taken as a very solar animal. Virgo is mutable earth, ruled by Mercury. So it is earthy. It is kind of practical and material, but there's a variability and a changeability to it. Mercury brings a lot of kind of intellect and patterns and things like that. So Virgo is often kind of very analytical, good at kind of organizing and analyzing. Coming up with plans of action and things like that. Virgos are often there's different kind of types of Virgos, but some Virgos are seen as being can be a little bit not uptight exactly, but something kind of along those lines. Also very kind of cleanly, so always keeping everything very clean and organized. I am not one of those types of Virgos. I'm more the kind of analytic type, and it can be kind of messy for a Virgo. Libra, cardinal air, ruled by Venus again. So with Venus here, there's a kind of sense of harmony, equality. That's sort of Libran kind of things of wanting to make things equal and fair. And again, the idea of the scales, right, of balance and of justice and of fairness and of kind of harmonizing people and things. Scorpio is sort of fixed water and ruled by Mars. So Aries is the kind of fiery cardinal Mars sign, and so Scorpio still has that kind of Mars energy, but it's something sort of subtler or less kind of less in your face. I heard I forget, I was listening to a podcast with some astrologers like talking about the signs, and they were talking about because Mars is so associated with combat. Right, and it's kind of the warrior of the planets, and so they were distinguishing between more of like an Aries warrior and a Scorpio warrior or something like that, where like an Aries warrior comes like running at you with a battle axe, and a Scorpio warrior like stabs you in the back or something like that. So a very different. There's still kind of an aggressive or. Well, not necessarily aggressive, but I mean, not all Scorpio people are aggressive, but just a kind of different type of Mars action or different expression of Mars. That's another way of thinking about the signs too, especially other than sort of Cancer and Leo. Other than Sun and Moon, the other 5 planets each rule 2 signs. So you can see these kind of 2 expressions of each planet. So you can think like, okay, Mars has Aries and Scorpio. How is that like 2 different expressions of Mars? How is Gemini and Virgo 2 different expressions of Mercury, and so on? That's a nice kind of exercise you can do. Sagittarius, we got mutable fire, ruled by Jupiter. Capricorn, cardinal Earth, ruled by Saturn. Aquarius, fixed air, again ruled by Saturn. And then Pisces is sort of mutable water and ruled by Jupiter. So again, I assume most of you have some basic familiarity with the meaning of the signs, but I just wanted to just sort of show this kind of structure, and it's something to kind of to play around with. A really good exercise, if you want to do it and get a better sense of these things and a better sense of the sort of structure of them, is sort of look at all the cardinal signs, look at all the mutable signs, look at all the fixed signs, and think, what do these things have in common? How are they different? Or look at the 3 fire signs and say, okay, you've got like cardinal, fixed and mutable. Like how is that 3 different like sort of modes or expressions of fire? Look at the planets and look at how those things interact. In something like with Aries, sort of cardinal, fire, and Mars, those are all fairly similar. But sometimes you get things that are a little more. Let's see, what would be like a good example? Like Scorpio is maybe an example, like fixed, water, and Mars. Those aren't quite, it's more complex or something like that. With Aries, you get the sense that all 3 things are largely the same type of energy. Some of them have a more complex type of energy. And again, this goes back to what I was saying about them being a little bit more like composite compared to like the planets and the elements, that they're made up of a kind of interaction of qualities. Okay, that's probably enough of that. And again, I assume a lot of you already are familiar with the signs of the zodiac. Okay, so just real brief on 777 and some of the attributions, on 777. So big thing to know about 777 is that Crowley authored it. Well, I mean, he largely got it from Mathers and Alan Bennett, but it was published before he had received the Book of the Law, but it took him about 25 years before he actually arrived at the solution of the Hayes-Zadi switch. Oh, and speaking of the Hayes-Zadi switch, I think maybe it was the first class, someone asked a really good question about how Crowley makes that statement about the Hayes-Zadi switch being this kind of like perfect symmetry. And I showed the way that symmetry happens, although it's not exactly symmetrical because of the fact of the signs changing with Hay and Zadi, which is a little bit different than the switch that happens with the tarot cards attributed to Leo and Libra. So sort of symmetrical, but not exactly. But I think that if you understand, Crowley spends a lot of these 25 years kind of searching for the solution to this idea that Zadi is not the star, right? Because his question, of course, goes, if Zadi is not the star, then what is Zadi and what is the star, right? And so he has this sort of question that he's wrestling with over decades, and then eventually kind of comes to this solution, that that Zadi is the emperor, and that He is the star, right? And then he realizes the symmetry, of the double twist in the zodiac diagram that I showed in the first class, and that to him is the sort of like the confirmation of it, not the reason that it happens. It's not just to produce like the double twist in the zodiac that he makes that switch. It's more that he arrives at the idea of that switch through his understanding of the symbols and the correspondences, and then the symmetry of the double loop sort of confirms that. I think that makes more sense. Whereas if you just think like, oh, he's trying to produce perfect symmetry, then it doesn't exactly work out. But if you think like, he arrives at this thing and then sees the symmetry, and that's what sort of confirms that he's right, I think it makes more sense. But anyways, in 777, the He-Zadi switch is not there. So when you read like the 15th path, right? The 15th path is attributed to He. And that's true, before and after the He-Zadi switch, the path numbering doesn't change. Oh, I had said earlier that anything connected to the letter doesn't change. Also, anything directly connected to the path number wouldn't change either. Like some of you may be familiar with something called the 32 Paths of Wisdom. Those wouldn't change. Those stay connected to the path and connected to the letter. Yeah. So which of the two paths of wisdom is attributed to Aries and to Aquarius? That changes. That they don't go with the switch, if that makes sense. So when you're reading 777, just keep in mind that the 15th path attributed to He is attributed to Aries. So you'll have to kind of mentally make that switch when you're looking at it. In Jim Eshelman's 776.5, he goes ahead and actually makes the switch on all the tables. So if you use 776.5, you don't have to worry about that problem. But in 777, you do. Though it's good training if you're going to read Golden Dawn material and stuff like that to kind of automatically ask those questions and look at those things whenever you see anything connected to Aries, Aquarius, He-Zadi, Emperor, Star. So this is one first table here where he shows the 12 simple letters, 12 signs of the zodiac. It's got the path numbers there on the right, and then the signs of the zodiac, then the planetary rulers, and you'll see he's using the traditional rulers just as I presented it. And then he's got the exaltations of the planets there. And then also the 12 banners of the name. This is, excuse me, the 12 banners of the name are the 12 permutations of Yod He Vav He. Really, well, for a four-lettered thing, there should be 24 permutations, but because two letters are the same, 12 of them are identical to the other 12, as long as you don't distinguish between the first and, He, the first He and final He. And so these are divine names that can be used, attributed to the zodiac. So if you're doing like a ritual with Aries, you can use, well, that's not a good example because that's just Yod He Vav He. But if you're doing a Virgo ritual, you could use the divine name He Vav Yod as a divine name for Virgo. And then you've also got a lot of other tables attributed to the 12 simple letters and to the signs of the zodiac in 777, but most of them aren't particularly useful. You've got a few columns of angelic hierarchies, and then after that you've got the magical. You got some stuff about the decans. The decans aren't super relevant for what we're talking about here. Essentially, it's a division of each sign of the zodiac into 3 10-degree sections, so you get 36 decans. They're sort of really interesting in their own right and have their own history and everything, but not super relevant here. But you will see it a lot in 777. So you get things like magical images of the decans, different perfumes attributed to each one of the decans. So the way Crowley lays it out is he gives you a column for like the first decan of each sign, and then another column for like the second decan of each sign, and then a third column for the third decan of each sign, which is sort of a weird way of laying it out, but it kind of fits his tables. And then you've got like 2 pages of Goetic correspondences. There are, at least in the version of the Goetia that Crowley was working with, there are 72 demons. And so those demons get attributed, or spirits, those 72 spirits get attributed to the 36 decans, both by day and by night, so that you have, that gives you, by sort of dividing the decans into day and night, that gives you 72 things to be able to attribute the 72 spirits to. So you've got the name of the spirit and then also a kind of brief description of it. And so that occupies, like 2 whole pages in 777 is all those tables, which is an extremely specialized thing that maybe could be useful if you're doing certain goetic work. But I've heard a lot of kind of goetic and grimoire magicians don't find those attributions useful. So just something to be aware. You'll see all these tables of like, what's he called? Like, see like goetic demons of decans ascendant or something like that. And then, and then just going on and on and on with all these different tables of goetic demons and their images and things like that. But most of it is extremely specialized or not very useful for most purposes anyways. And like in 776.5, Jim Eshelman doesn't even reproduce a lot of that stuff. He kind of takes what he sees as like the core significations. I think in a lot of ways, the attributions of the 72 demons to the 72 spirits to the decans is a little bit of more of like an exercise in attributions rather than something super practical. Okay, so we only went 10 minutes over. Hope that was all right with everybody. But we had a bunch of stuff to cover. So this concludes our tour through the Sefer Yetzirah and through looking at these sort of 3 divisions of letters. From here on out, for the remaining 8 classes, we'll just sort of go through in alphabetical order, letter by letter. And so we're not talking about them in groups, but looking at each one on its own. So when I talked about the planets and things like that, I kind of abbreviated a lot of the stuff, didn't go through all of the correspondences, but we'll go through stuff in a lot more detail. And we'll probably spend about half of the remaining time left talking about the tarot as well and the tarot trumps. But I wanted to get down some of the stuff about the relationships between the letters and some about their organization and give you kind of an introduction to it before plunging into a really, really detailed look at it. So I hope that was useful. I'm happy to hang out for a few more minutes if anybody else has any other questions, but that wraps it up for this week, and hope to see you all again next week. But like I said, if anybody has questions, or comments or whatever, feel free to go ahead. I'm happy to hang out for a few minutes. Thanks everybody. I hope this is useful. I sort of realized that this is kind of a big undertaking, doing sort of an hour and a half, 12 kind of hour and a half long sessions just on this thing. But I hope that this is useful for people to get a sense of not just kind of like, oh, you hear the correspondences, memorize them or something like that, but about how these things are actually used, the relationships they form, the way that they connect to other parts of magic. So I don't expect, especially people who are newer or something like that, to like get all of this or to memorize all of this. More of like a kind of demonstration. And in some places, just seeds for other things that you can look into. As long as this class is going to be, it could be a lot longer if you really, really wanted to go into detail. Great. Thanks, guys. I'm glad this is you're finding this useful. And hopefully it's a nice thing to do in these kind of strange times that we're in right now. Having this kind of weekly thing. I hope this is nice for people. It's been nice for me. And this excuse to kind of really look at this stuff in detail and examine it in detail. I've never gone this deep into the Sefer Yetzirah before, so that was really interesting for me too. So I'll get this up on the forum. Anyone who has access to the forum, you may have seen that I posted, I made like just a kind of sticky post on the top of the general discussion forum where we can just sort of archive all the recordings for, for classes that any public class that I do or other academic track instructors do. We can just kind of archive them all there. And so you won't get like a notification. I'll just go and like edit the link, and just sort of insert the link to this class in there. But because I'm not going to make a new post each time, you won't get a notification. So just check in. I'll try to get that up by like Tuesday or Wednesday. We have to coordinate between multiple people to get stuff into Dropbox. It's a little of a pain, but it'll be up there. So just check the forum midweek. For other webinars and lectures, there's nothing else. This series is the only one that's going on right now. Hopefully other instructors will be offering other series soon. That when I did in the Sphinx last month, that was just kind of in place of It would have been the public class in the local class in Sacramento where we actually just meet in person. So I did like an online presentation just instead of that. So I'm not going to do a Monday night class for May because that would be tomorrow. I'm just going to sort of continuing with this series. So right now this series is all that we have running. But yeah, thanks for asking about that. That's a good thing to clarify. And then for Sacramento area people, as soon as we're able to meet in person again, which could be as early as next month, if we're lucky, we'll start meeting in person again. And I'll do just like kind of audio recordings of that and post those up on the forum. But they won't be webinars. But I'm not going to do Monday night webinars. We'll just wait until we can meet in person again. Good luck looking for sea goats on the beach, Jason. All right, yeah, I don't see any more comments coming in. So yeah, thanks everybody. Stay safe, stay healthy out there, and I'll see you next Sunday. 93, everyone.